The howling wind carried snowflakes that stung like needles as Priscilla Turner stumbled through the darkening streets of Bison Creek, one hand pressed against her swollen belly, the other clutching a worn leather satchel containing everything she owned in the world. February 1878 had brought the harshest winter anyone in the Wyoming Territory could remember, and tonight's blizzard threatened to be the worst yet. "You ain't welcome here no more." The innkeeper's words still rang in her ears as she trudged through the deepening snow. "Unmarried and with child. What would the decent folk think if I let the likes of you stay?" Priscilla had been working as a seamstress at the inn for nearly 6 months, hiding her growing condition beneath loose dresses until today, when she doubled over with pain while serving dinner. The innkeeper's wife had discovered her secret, and within minutes, Priscilla found herself thrown out into the bitter cold with nothing but her satchel and the clothes on her back. A contraction seized her, stronger than the others, and she gasped, leaning against the wall of the general store. The business had closed hours ago, like everything else in town. No lights shone in windows. No one walked the streets in this weather except a desperate woman with nowhere to go. "Lord help me," she whispered, her breath forming clouds in the frigid air. At 22, she'd never imagined ending up like this alone, pregnant, and freezing to death in a town where no one knew her real story. Another pain gripped her, and Priscilla slid down the wall, the snow soaking through her thin dress. She'd come west after her parents died, believing the letter from a cousin promising work and a new beginning. But the cousin had moved on by the time she arrived, and the man who'd promised to marry her had disappeared with the first frost, leaving her with nothing but shame and a child on the way. Miss, are you all right?" The voice came to her as if from far away. Priscilla struggled to focus on the figure approaching through the swirling snow. A man on horseback, his face obscured by a bandana pulled up against the cold. "I." She tried to respond, but another contraction stole her words. The rider dismounted in a fluid motion and crouched beside her. When he pulled down the bandana, she saw a face weathered by sun and wind, with kind eyes that crinkled at the corners. He couldn't have been more than 30. "You're in a bad way," he said, taking in her condition with a glance. "Where were you headed in this storm?" "Nowhere," Priscilla admitted, her voice cracking. "They threw me out of the inn. I have nowhere to go." Understanding dawned in his eyes as he noticed her condition. Instead of the judgment she expected, he simply nodded and slipped off his heavy duster coat. "Name's Nathan Porter," he said, wrapping the coat around her shoulders. It was still warm from his body and smelled of leather, horses, and pine. "Most folks call me Nate." "Priscilla Turner," she managed between shallow breaths. Without hesitation, Nathan scooped her into his arms, coat and all. "My cabin's not far. Can you hold on that long?" She nodded weakly against his chest, too exhausted and grateful to protest. He settled her on his horse, then mounted behind her, one arm wrapped securely around her waist while the other held the reins. "Hang on now, Miss Turner," he murmured, his breath warm against her ear as they set off into the night. "I've got you." The blizzard intensified as they rode, but Nathan's body shielded her from the worst of it. Each time a contraction came, he seemed to sense it, his arm tightening around her reassuringly. Priscilla found herself leaning into his strength, wondering what kind of man would stop to help a fallen woman in a snowstorm. After what seemed like hours but was likely less than one, lights appeared through the trees, a small cabin with smoke curling from the chimney. "Home," Nathan said simply as they approached. "Not much, but it's warm." He helped her dismount, practically carrying her to the door. Inside, a fire burned cheerfully in the hearth, casting the simple one-room cabin in golden light. A bed stood in one corner, a table and chairs in another, and cooking implements hung neatly by the stove. "Let me get you settled," he said, guiding her to the bed. "Then I'll see to my horse." Priscilla sank onto the mattress, still wrapped in his coat. "Why are you helping me?" she asked, the question that had been burning in her mind finally finding voice. Nathan paused at the door. "My ma always said you don't need a reason to help folks who need helping." With that, he disappeared into the storm. When he returned minutes later, stomping snow from his boots, Priscilla was in the grip of another contraction, stronger than before. "The baby's coming," she gasped. "I think it's coming now." If Nathan was alarmed, he didn't show it. He moved with surprising efficiency, putting water to boil on the stove and gathering clean linens from a trunk. "I've helped birth plenty of calves and foals," he said, rolling up his sleeves. "Not quite the same, I reckon, but the principle stands. My sister had 2 little ones before she moved back east. I was there for both." His calm reassurance steadied her. Over the next several hours, as the blizzard raged outside and her labor intensified, Nathan proved to be the companion she never expected. He wiped her brow with cool cloths, held her hand through contractions, and spoke in low, encouraging tones when she thought she couldn't continue. "You're the strongest woman I ever met, Miss Turner," he told her as dawn approached and her labor reached its peak. "Just a little more now." With a final, tremendous effort, Priscilla brought her daughter into the world just as the first light of morning filtered through the cabin windows. Nathan caught the tiny, wailing infant in his large, calloused hands with a tenderness that brought tears to Priscilla's eyes. "A perfect little girl," he said, his voice thick with emotion as he wrapped the baby in a clean blanket and placed her in Priscilla's arms. "Looks just like her mama." Exhausted but filled with a joy she'd never known, Priscilla gazed down at her daughter's tiny face. "Grace," she whispered. "Her name is Grace." Nathan busied himself cleaning up, giving mother and child a moment of privacy. When he returned to the bedside, he carried a cup of hot tea sweetened with honey. "Thank you," Priscilla said, the words utterly inadequate for what he'd done. "I don't know how I'll ever repay you." "No need," he replied, sitting carefully on the edge of the bed. "But you're welcome to stay until you're strong enough to travel, both of you." In the days that followed, as the snow continued to fall, and the world outside remained locked in winter's grip, Priscilla learned more about the quiet cowboy who had saved her life. Nathan Porter had come west after the war, working cattle drives before staking a small claim outside Bison Creek 3 years earlier. He raised horses, now not many, but quality stock that brought good prices. He lived alone, reading books by lamplight in the evenings and keeping mostly to himself. "People in town think I'm odd," he admitted one night as they sat by the fire, little Grace sleeping peacefully in a makeshift cradle he'd fashioned from a drawer. "A man my age, not married, more interested in horses than saloons." "I don't think you're odd," Priscilla said softly. "I think you're kind." Nathan's smile transformed his face, softening the lines etched by sun and weather. "That means something, coming from you." As February gave way to March and the worst of winter began to ease, Priscilla grew stronger. She insisted on earning her keep, cooking meals and mending Nathan's clothes while he tended his horses. In the evenings, she would sew by the fire while he read aloud from one of his books: poetry, history, adventure tales. His voice, low and melodious, often lulled both Grace and her mother to sleep. They developed a comfortable routine, moving around each other in the small cabin with an ease that surprised them both. Nathan proved remarkably adept with the baby, never hesitating to rock Grace when she fussed or change her when needed. "You're good with her," Priscilla observed one evening as Nathan walked the floor with the colicky infant, humming softly. "She makes it easy," he replied, looking down at the baby with unmistakable affection. "Never thought I'd be much for children, but this little one." He trailed off, shaking his head with a smile. As the snow began to melt and the first green shoots appeared, Priscilla knew she would soon need to decide what to do next. She had a little money saved from her work at the inn, perhaps enough to take her and Grace to another town where no one knew her past. The thought brought an unexpected ache to her heart. The cabin had become home in a way no place had since her parents died. And Nathan had become something she dared not name, even to herself. One clear April morning, Priscilla was hanging laundry while Grace napped when Nathan rode in from town, his saddlebags bulging with supplies. "Brought something for you," he said, producing a package wrapped in brown paper. "Saw it in the mercantile window." Inside was a length of blue calico fabric, the exact shade of her eyes. "Nathan, you shouldn't have," she protested, even as her fingers caressed the beautiful material. "Thought it might make a nice dress," he said, suddenly shy. "For when you're feeling up to going to town. If you want to, that is." The implication hung in the air between them. He wasn't pushing her to leave, but acknowledging that eventually she might want more than the isolation of his cabin. "Thank you," she said simply, holding the fabric to her chest. That night, after Grace was asleep, they sat as usual by the fire. But something had shifted between them, a tension that hadn't been there before. "I should be thinking about moving on," Priscilla said at last, voicing the thought that had been weighing on her. "I've imposed on your kindness far too long." Nathan set aside his book. "You're not imposing, having you and Grace here." He cleared his throat. "It's been good." "For us too," she admitted. "But I can't stay forever." "Why not?" The question came so quietly she almost didn't hear it. Priscilla looked up, startled. "What? Why can't you stay?" Nathan's expression was earnest, vulnerable. "I know it's not much, this place, and I'm just a simple horse breeder with more books than sense, according to most. But I care for you, Priscilla, both of you." Her heart thundered in her chest. People would talk. A woman living with a man who's not her husband, with a child that's not his, then marry me. The words hung in the air between them, shocking them both with their simplicity. "Nathan," she whispered, tears filling her eyes. "You don't have to do that." He moved to kneel before her chair, taking her hands in his. "I'm not offering out of obligation. These past weeks have been the happiest of my life. I never thought I'd find someone who fits so perfectly in my world, who makes this cabin feel like a home." "But Grace, I already love her like she's my own," he said fiercely, "and I'd be proud to give her my name." He hesitated. "Unless there's someone else you're hoping might come back." "No," Priscilla said firmly. "Grace's father made his choice long ago. There's no love lost there. And me." Nathan's voice grew softer. "Could you love me in time?" The question caught her off guard, not because it was difficult, but because the answer was already so clear. "I already do," she confessed, the words both terrifying and liberating. "I've loved you since that night in the blizzard, when you wrapped me in your coat and your arms and made me feel safe for the first time in so long." Nathan's smile could have outshone the sun. He leaned forward, hesitating just a breath away, seeking permission. Priscilla closed the distance, pressing her lips to his in a kiss that felt like coming home. The next Sunday, they rode into Bison Creek together. Nathan wore his best shirt, and Priscilla had worked through the night to finish a simple dress from the blue calico. Grace, wrapped in a pristine white blanket, slept contentedly in her mother's arms. They went straight to the preacher's house beside the small church. The older man raised his eyebrows at the baby, but asked no questions when Nathan explained they wished to be married. "Today?" the preacher inquired. "Right now, if you're willing," Nathan confirmed, his hand steady on Priscilla's back. The ceremony was brief. witnessed only by the preacher's wife and an elderly deacon who happened to be fixing a church pew. But when Nathan slipped his mother's ring onto Priscilla's finger and promised to love and cherish her all the days of his life, it felt more sacred and true than any grand wedding could have been. "I now pronounce you man and wife," the preacher declared. "What God has joined together, let no man put asunder." As they emerged from the church, Priscilla spotted the innkeeper's wife across the street, her mouth open in shock. Instead of the shame she expected to feel, Priscilla found herself standing taller, secure in Nathan's love and the future they would build together. "Mrs. Porter," Nathan said with a grin as he helped her onto the wagon he'd borrowed for the occasion. "Shall we go home?" "Yes," Priscilla replied, Grace stirring in her arms. "Let's go home." Summer came to the Wyoming Territory in a riot of wildflowers and warm breezes. The small cabin had grown with the addition of another room, a nursery for Grace, built by Nathan's hands during the long evenings of spring. Priscilla had planted a garden that now flourished with vegetables and herbs, and 3 new foals frolicked in the paddock beside their mothers. Nathan's business prospered as word spread of his skill with horses. Buyers came from as far as Cheyenne to see his stock, and many stayed for supper, charmed by the hospitality of the young family. "You've changed him," an old rancher told Priscilla one evening as Nathan showed off a promising yearling. "Used to be the most solitary man I knew. Now look at him, can't stop smiling." Priscilla watched her husband with pride. He'd filled out over the months, the regular meals and happiness agreeing with him. And he was indeed smiling more than ever, especially when he looked at Grace, who had begun to pull herself up on furniture and babble happily. "He changed me too," she admitted to the rancher. "Gave me a second chance when I thought all was lost." As the visitors departed and dusk settled over the homestead, Nathan came to sit beside her on the porch steps, Grace dozing against his shoulder. "Good day," he said, contentment evident in his voice. "The best," she agreed, leaning into him. They sat in comfortable silence, watching fireflies emerge in the gathering darkness. This was their favorite time of day, the quiet moments when the world narrowed to just the 3 of them. "I have something to tell you," Priscilla said after a while, her hand finding his. "Something important." Nathan turned to look at her, concern immediately filling his eyes. "Everything all right?" she smiled, squeezing his fingers. "More than all right. I visited Dr. Simmons when you were at the blacksmith's yesterday." She took a deep breath. "We're going to have another baby, Nathan." Around Christmas time, his face transformed with wonder. "A baby, our baby, our baby," she confirmed, tears of happiness filling her eyes. "Grace will have a little brother or sister." Nathan gathered her close with his free arm, careful not to disturb the sleeping child. "I never dreamed," he whispered against her hair. "When I found you that night in the snow, I never imagined how completely you would change my life. For the better, I hope," she said, half teasing. "Beyond anything I could have hoped for," he assured her, kissing her softly. "I love you, Priscilla Porter, more with each passing day. And I love you, Nathan Porter, my cowboy, my savior, my heart." As darkness fell completely, they remained on the porch, a family forged in adversity and bound by love, looking forward to all the seasons yet to come. The following spring brought not only new foals and fresh green grass, but the patter of Grace's first steps across the cabin floor. Now 16 months old, she was the image of her mother with bright eyes that missed nothing and a determination that often left her parents breathless. "She's going to be running the whole territory before she's 5, Nathan predicted one afternoon as he watched Grace toddle determinedly after a butterfly in the garden. "Just like her father," Priscilla replied from where she sat shelling peas, her own belly beginning to round with their second child, always wanting to make things better for everyone around her. Nathan's cheeks colored at the compliment. Even after nearly a year of marriage, he still seemed surprised by her praise, as if he couldn't quite believe his good fortune. Their peaceful routine was interrupted one sweltering July day by the arrival of a dusty rider on a lathered horse. Nathan was out checking the fencing, so Priscilla greeted the stranger from the porch, Grace on her hip. "Madam," the man said, removing his hat. "Looking for Nathan Porter. Sheriff in town said I'd find him here." "He's my husband," Priscilla replied, wary of the man's intense expression. "He should be back shortly. May I ask what this is regarding?" The man hesitated. "Name's James Whittaker. I'm a Pinkerton agent tracking a fugitive who's been operating in these parts. Fellow named Edmund Turner, wanted for bank robbery and murder in Missouri." Priscilla nearly dropped Grace. "Turner? Yes, madam, you know of him," she swallowed hard. "My maiden name was Turner, but I assure you I've never heard of any Edmund Turner in my family." The agent studied her carefully. "Just a coincidence, then." "This man's been reported working with a gang that hit the bank in Laramie last month. Rumor has it they're planning something bigger. Your husband's horses have a reputation, thought he might have heard something, maybe had a customer acting suspicious." Before Priscilla could respond, the sound of hoofbeats announced Nathan's return. He dismounted quickly when he saw the stranger, his posture protective as he approached the porch. "Nathan Porter," he introduced himself, extending a hand while moving to stand beside Priscilla. "What can I do for you?" As the agent repeated his story, Priscilla felt a chill despite the summer heat. The name Turner was common enough, but a criminal operating in the area made her uneasy. She had never told Nathan the full story of Grace's father, only that he had abandoned her when he learned of the pregnancy. The truth was more complicated. Preston Turner had seemed like a gentleman when he'd courted her in Denver, claiming to be a businessman with interests in mining. Only after she'd given him her heart, and more, did she discover his business involved gambling and confidence schemes. When she confronted him, he'd left her with nothing but a promise to return that she'd foolishly believed for too long. Now, hearing the name Turner linked to robbery and murder, she wondered if her Preston and this Edmund could possibly be the same man, using different names for different schemes. "I haven't noticed anything unusual," Nathan was saying, "but I'll keep my eyes open. Most of my customers are regulars I've known for years." The agent nodded, replacing his hat. "Appreciate it. If you hear anything, let Sheriff Donovan know. I'll be in the area for a while." After the agent departed, Nathan turned to Priscilla, concern etched on his features. "You went white as a sheet when he mentioned that name. What is it?" Priscilla settled Grace on a quilt in the shade before facing her husband. "I need to tell you something about Grace's father." She told him everything then, how Preston Turner had charmed her with tales of wealth and adventure, promised marriage, then disappeared when she told him about the baby. How she'd later heard rumors that he'd done the same to other women in other towns. "I don't know if it's the same man this agent is looking for," she finished, "but the timing fits. Preston left Denver around the time these robberies started." Nathan was quiet for a long moment. "Why didn't you tell me before?" "I was ashamed," she admitted. "Ashamed of being so foolish, so easily deceived. And later, after we married, it seemed like it belonged to another life, one I wanted to forget." He took her hands in his. "There's nothing you could tell me that would change how I feel about you, Priscilla. Nothing." Relief washed over her. "I should have trusted you with the truth from the beginning. We all have parts of our past we'd rather leave behind," he said gently. "What matters is our future, yours, mine, Grace's, and this little one's." His hand rested briefly on her belly. But despite his reassurances, the agent's visit cast a shadow over their happiness. Priscilla found herself scanning the horizon whenever she was alone at the homestead, jumping at unexpected sounds. Nathan made a point of not leaving her for long, and when business took him to town, he arranged for a neighbor's son to stay within shouting distance. August brought scorching heat and rumors of the Turner gang striking a stagecoach near Casper. September came with cooler temperatures and news that the gang had been spotted heading south. By October, with no further incidents reported nearby, they began to relax their vigilance. Priscilla was in her 7th month now, her movements slower but her spirits high as they prepared for the baby's arrival. The harvest had been good. The root cellar was stocked for winter, and Nathan had taken on a young ranch hand named Illy to help with the horses so he could spend more time at home. One crisp afternoon, while Nathan and Illy were delivering a pair of geldings to a buyer 15 miles away, Priscilla was hanging the last of the laundry when she noticed a rider approaching from the east, the opposite direction from town. Grace played nearby with the carved wooden animals Nathan had made for her, oblivious to her mother's sudden tension. As the rider drew closer, Priscilla's heart began to pound. There was something familiar in the way he sat his horse, in the set of his shoulders. She gathered Grace into her arms and retreated to the porch, one hand on the door latch. The man reined in his mount at the edge of the yard and removed his hat. Though thinner than she remembered, with a new scar along his jawline, there was no mistaking those sharp features and calculating eyes. "Hello, Priscilla," Preston Turner said, his smile as charming and empty as it had been 2 years before. "You're looking well." She held Grace tighter. "What are you doing here? Is that any way to greet an old friend?" He dismounted, moving toward the porch with the casual confidence of a man used to getting his way. "Especially one who's come such a long way to see you." "We have nothing to say to each other," Priscilla replied, fighting to keep her voice steady. "Please leave." Preston's gaze fixed on Grace. "That's her, isn't it? My daughter." "She's my daughter," Priscilla corrected. "You made your choice when you walked away." His expression hardened momentarily before the smooth mask slipped back into place. "I made a mistake. I've regretted it every day since." He took another step forward. "I've come to make things right, Priscilla, to take you both away from all this." His gesture encompassed the modest homestead with undisguised disdain. "I'm married now," she said, lifting her chin. "This is my home. My husband will be back soon." Something dangerous flashed in Preston's eyes. "The horse breeder. Yes, I heard in town. Quite the little family you've made for yourself." His tone made the words an insult. "But it's based on a lie, isn't it? Does he know who your daughter's father really is? What he does?" Fear and anger warred within her. "My husband knows everything about me that matters. Now leave before he returns." Preston laughed, the sound chilling her blood. "I don't think I will. In fact, I think it's time for a family reunion, the 3 of us together again." "There is no 3 of us," Priscilla said, backing through the door and shutting it firmly. She set Grace down and moved swiftly to retrieve the rifle Nathan kept above the mantel. Her hands shook as she loaded it, remembering Nathan's patient lessons. "If you ever need to use this," he'd told her, "aim for the center of what you can see and don't hesitate." Outside, she heard Preston's boots on the porch steps. "Open the door, Priscilla," he called, his voice hardening. "Don't make this difficult." She positioned herself in the center of the room, the rifle raised. "I've sent for the sheriff," she lied. "He'll be here any minute." Preston laughed again. "No, you haven't. Your ranch hand rode out with your husband hours ago. It's just you and me and my daughter." The door handle turned and Priscilla's finger tightened on the trigger. But before Preston could force his way in, the sound of approaching riders caused him to curse. "This isn't over," he called through the door. "I'll be back for what's mine." From the window, Priscilla watched him mount and ride hard for the tree line just as Nathan and Ellie appeared from the opposite direction. She sagged against the wall, the rifle suddenly heavy in her trembling hands. Nathan burst through the door moments later, his expression frantic. "Priscilla!" The neighbor's boy came running to town saying he saw a stranger heading this way. He stopped short at the sight of the rifle. "What happened? Are you hurt, Grace?" "We're fine," she managed, lowering the weapon. "But it was him, Nathan, Preston Turner, Grace's father." Nathan's face darkened as she recounted the encounter. When she finished, he pulled her and Grace into a fierce embrace. "I'm sending Ellie for the sheriff," he said. "And then we're going to pack some things. You and Grace aren't staying here tonight." "I won't be driven from my home," Priscilla protested. "Just for a few days," Nathan assured her, "until they catch him. The Pinkerton agent was right. Turner's part of that gang. Sheriff told me they robbed a bank in Colorado last week. 3 men died." The news chilled her. The charming scoundrel who had seduced her was now a killer. And he wanted Grace. That night they stayed at the small hotel in Bison Creek, their room paid for by the sympathetic sheriff who posted a deputy in the hallway. The next morning brought news that riders matching the description of the Turner gang had been spotted 20 miles north. "They're moving on," the sheriff assured them, "probably headed for the Montana territory to lie low for the winter." Nathan wasn't convinced. He came specifically for Priscilla and Grace. A man like that doesn't give up easily. The sheriff nodded grimly. "We'll keep watch, but you might consider taking your family somewhere else until this blows over. Denver, maybe, or even back east." "This is our home," Nathan said firmly. "We're not running." Instead, they returned to the homestead with a plan. Nathan hired 2 more hands, ex-soldiers with steady nerves and good aim. They took turns standing watch day and night. Priscilla never went outside alone, and Grace was never out of sight of at least one adult. November arrived with the first snow and no sign of Preston Turner. The Pinkerton agent returned to town with news that most of the gang had been captured after a failed robbery attempt in Billings. But Preston himself had escaped, vanishing into the wilderness. "He'll show up eventually," the agent told them. "Men like Turner always do. They can't help themselves." The warning proved prophetic. 3 days before Thanksgiving, as Priscilla was preparing for bed, a pebble struck the bedroom window. Nathan was in the barn, checking on a mare about to foal. Drawing the curtain aside cautiously, she saw Preston standing in the yard below, his breath clouding in the cold air. "Just a moment of your time," he called softly. "That's all I ask." Priscilla's first instinct was to call for help, but the ranch hands were in the bunkhouse on the far side of the property. Nathan wouldn't hear her from the barn, and Grace was sleeping peacefully in her room. Decision made, she pulled on her coat and boots. Taking the small revolver Nathan had insisted she carry, she slipped it into her pocket before stepping onto the porch. 5 minutes, she said, her voice carrying in the still night air. "Then I'm calling for my husband." Preston approached slowly, hands visible at his sides. In the moonlight, she could see he looked haggard, his clothes torn and dirty. "You're looking well," he said, eyeing her pregnant form. "Settled right in, didn't you?" "What do you want, Preston?" "Money," he admitted bluntly. "Enough to get me to California, a fresh start." "I don't have that kind of money." "Your husband does," Preston countered. "Those horses of his fetch a pretty price, and I know he just sold 3 to that railroad man." Priscilla's hand closed around the revolver in her pocket. "So you're a thief as well as a murderer now." Preston's expression hardened. "I never killed anyone who didn't have it coming, and I wouldn't be in this position if you'd waited for me like you promised." "You told me you were coming back with a ring," she retorted. "Instead, You were off robbing banks and leaving a trail of broken hearts." "I made mistakes," he conceded. "But I'm Grace's father, that has to count for something." "It might have once, if you'd actually been a father to her, but you weren't. Nathan is the only father she's ever known." Preston took a step closer, his eyes dangerous. "I could take her, you know. Right now. You couldn't stop me." Priscilla drew the revolver, aiming it steadily at his chest. "Yes, I could." For a long moment they stared at each other, the years and choices between them like a chasm that could never be bridged. "You've changed," Preston said finally. "I've grown up," Priscilla corrected. "Now go before I call my husband. He won't be as merciful as I'm being." Preston hesitated, then backed away slowly. "This isn't over, Priscilla. I'll be back when you least expect it, for my daughter, for what's mine." "She was never yours," Priscilla said softly. "Goodbye, Preston." She watched him disappear into the darkness, her heart pounding but her hand steady on the revolver. Only when she was certain he was gone did she return inside, locking the door behind her. Nathan found her sitting by Grace's bed, watching their daughter sleep. "What is it?" he asked, kneeling beside her. "The mare's fine, but you look like you've seen a ghost." "Preston was here," she told him, recounting the conversation. "He wanted money and Grace." Nathan's jaw tightened. "I'm going after him." "No," Priscilla caught his arm. "That's what he wants, to separate us, make us vulnerable. We need to stay together, keep Grace safe." Nathan looked at her with a mixture of pride and concern. "When did you become so wise?" "The day I met you," she said simply. "When I realized what real love looks like." They spent that night in Grace's room, taking turns keeping watch. But Preston didn't return, and the next day, tracks in the snow showed he'd ridden hard toward the western mountains. The following weeks passed in tense vigilance. Christmas came, bringing with it not only the usual festivities but the birth of their son, Nicholas Nathan Porter, a healthy boy with his father's serious expression and his mother's determined chin. As Priscilla recovered from the birth, news reached them that Preston Turner had been captured trying to rob a stagecoach near Sacramento. The Pinkerton agent personally delivered the telegram confirming that Turner would stand trial for multiple murders and robberies. "He'll hang," the agent said bluntly. "Too many bodies, too much evidence. You won't have to worry about him anymore." Relief washed over the homestead like the spring thaw. Nathan expanded the cabin, adding another bedroom and a proper parlor. Priscilla planted more flowers and started taking in sewing work from town, her skill with a needle bringing a steady income that supplemented their growing horse business. By the time Nicholas took his first steps the following autumn, the shadow of Preston Turner had faded from their lives. Grace, now 3, was a lively chatterbox who followed Nathan everywhere, learning about horses and helping with chores. She had no memory of the man who had threatened to take her away, and Priscilla was grateful for that small mercy. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the Wyoming sky in shades of gold and crimson, Nathan reached for Priscilla's hand. "I've been thinking," he said, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "About that night we met, how close we came to never finding each other." Priscilla smiled, remembering the blizzard, the pain, the fear. "If you hadn't come along when you did, if you hadn't been exactly where you were," he countered. "Providence," she said softly. Nathan nodded. "I believe that now, though I never used to. That some things are meant to be, no matter how unlikely they seem." Across the yard, Grace chased fireflies while baby Nicholas watched from his blanket, gurgling with delight at his sister's antics. "They're our miracle," Nathan continued. "All of this is. I wake up every morning grateful that you were cast into that storm, Priscilla, that I found you, that you let me wrap you in my coat and my arms and my heart." Tears filled her eyes as she leaned against his shoulder. I never believed in happy endings until I met you, Nathan Porter. Now I can't imagine any other kind." As darkness settled over the homestead, the little family gathered close, bound by a love that had begun on the coldest of nights and grown through all the seasons since, a love as vast and enduring as the western sky above them.